And if there are any spaces between
There is one more
you
there.
and the next person, fragment the room, as it were. Get all nice and cozy. Everyone's really nice. So, okay. So it's 11 o'clock, and I'm going to speak into David's shoulder because he has the microphone. So this is David Hollas. I hope I pronounced it right. And he is a software engineer working at Red Hat on the Manage IQ open source hybrid infrastructure management platform. And he's going to talk to us about this. So take it away, David.
So, hi everyone. Hi everyone. I hope you guessed that I'm not Teresa. She was the original speaker of this talk together with me, and it's a talk about how we cooperate, how we do the cooperation between engineers and designers at Red Hat. So, a few words about Teresa, as she isn't here. She's an interaction designer at Red Hat. She oversees the projects I'm working on as an engineer, for example, Manage IQ and other projects like Foreman. She lived 7 years in North Carolina, and she loves working with people and bringing the human aspect to the software engineering. And she's a runner, as you can see on the picture. So that's me. You already heard my introduction. I really love JavaScript, but I used to maintain Patternfly's SaaS port, and I work mostly in Ruby, and I like to play the guitar. We both work for Red Hat. You probably know the company. Red Hat has over 40 different products. Only some of them have a user interface. We're going to talk about those because that's where UX comes into the picture. They all look different. Most of them came by acquisition. They were developed by different teams. So here you can see how they looked like. They are kind of feel disconnected. The only common thing maybe can be the Red Hat logo. And let's go back to the history in 2013 when the Red Hat UXD team was formed by 5 brave people. Their goal was to improve user experience, to make the look and feel of the Red Hat portfolio more consistent, to create a system that helps all. So they started to work on the disconnected pieces, like this, working on a solution that can help designers and engineers in an open source way. Most of our developers didn't really want to touch the user interface part, so we wanted some kind of Legoing that they can put together and build it up as a website or a web application. So they ended up with this thought that we need a design system. Different products build the same things over and over again, and they have inconsistent patterns like login screen, a form, or just a simple button. And it took designers and engineers a lot to agree, so we wanted to standardize these steps, for example, and make the things consistent. Does anyone know what consistency means? So in user experience, it means that the user can find similar patterns in similar places. If you have a button on the left side or on the right side, or you have switched them off, we wanted to define those, standardize those in a design system. So the first part is already explained. We wanted to improve consistency. We wanted to increase the usability, reduce the time of cost to market, so we don't have to build all the stuff over and over again. And we wanted to share all the stuff in an open source way with the community. Some of them you might ask, what's the design system, right? I'm talking it about. So it's basically a set of guidelines, rules, constraints, principles implemented in the design and code. Some of you already heard about Material from Google. If you're using Android or any Google application on the web, it has a common user interface. Or Salesforce has the Lightning, which they use across their own product portfolio. Both companies, Google and Salesforce, have very wide product portfolio, so it's nearly impossible to maintain consistency without such system. and we needed something similar. So after learning about the competition, meet our design system. As any other Red Hat project, it's open source. But it has a community around itself, as any other Red Hat project, but it focuses more on designers than engineers. You can check the website, it's patternfly.org. At the start, it was just a custom styling over Bootstrap with some jQuery. It was more enterprise focused, it was more condensed. We implemented a lot of extra widgets with jQuery, such as date picker, time picker, tree view, which caused a lot of JavaScript dependencies, third-party ones. The first success with Patternfly was, if you remember these, and when we applied Patternfly on these products, they started to look similar and very, very consistent, and you could feel that they are from the same family, let's say. And this allowed us to grow the UX team. So it's a success. Thanks to the revolution on the front end in JavaScript, the whole thing how we develop on the front end changed. Yes, I'm talking about React and Angular and all those things. And this is what our developers' preference was. They saw the shiny new stuff and they wanted to use it. So they started to implement their own things in those frameworks. And for that, we had to implement, which caused inconsistency, because they started to implement their own stuff and not shared with the community that much as Patternfly would do. But as a band-aid solution, we started to support these libraries in Patternfly itself. So we created the components in Angular or React or Angular 2. So when those frameworks started to develop, you can see from the contribution graphs, some of them got more popular than the others. So some of them got more components than the others. So you might ended up, as a software engineer, you might ended up with using more libraries just to have the right set of components available, which is probably not a nice thing to have Angular and React in your application at the same time. So from this, we learned that we might need a universal solution, which is like something like this, maybe, if you know the picture. So it's kind of megalomaniac, but we might be okay with something suboptimal. So we started to think about componentizing the Patternfly. So we can split it up to smaller pieces, so it's easier to react to changes. We removed all the JavaScript from the core repo. We split up Patternfly into really small atomic mini libraries, let's say, components. We implemented all of them in React. And as they are mini libraries, you can pull them into your code base one by one. So it's easy to do a transition from your old Word JavaScript to a new component-based application gradually. About Bootstrap. Patternfly used to be a Bootstrap library. We no longer need it. It's not really enterprise looking. We didn't want to use jQuery anymore, and we wanted to reduce the number of third-party libraries. So we made our own Bootstrap with CSS grids and without jQuery. Yay, that's the part where Teresa is singing and woohoo, and something like that. So meet Patternfly next. It has everything that I described before. It's without Bootstrap, it's without jQuery, it has the isolated components as mini libraries. I have this nice picture where you can see that the CSS part is very, very thin, just the grid system. On the top of it, there are the atomic components. Those parts are created by the UXD team all alone. And on the top, we are building advanced components, Legoing together the atomic ones, together with engineering. And those advanced components are tailored to the engineering needs. And then the engineers can use those components in their products as high-level stuff. So basically, this is how we collaborate. And it's fun to work with each other. So going back to Patternfly, Our goal is to apply Patternfly to all our products. It means understanding the Patternfly patterns and knowing how they should be applied. As you might already heard today, consistency is important. I will give you some time to read it. Okay. Using the components over and over again eliminates confusion, and we can end up building consistent look and feel in our applications quicker. That leads to consistency. Here's a component, let's say, an abstraction of a component. It doesn't really do much, but if you have the right set of components and you organize them well, you can build castles. You can build multiple class castles next to each other, and if someone looks at them, they will think that it's made by the same architect. Remember our UXD team? It started with 5 people. Now we have 95 people. Over the years, it grew exponentially. Since then, we are working with engineering teams more and more to build successful products. And it's fun to work with each other. So we enjoy bringing ideas to life, and we value the collaboration between designers and engineers. To sum it up, it's about continuous evolvement, about communication between designers and engineers, and adjusting the right solution to the right problem. For the end, I don't know how much time I have. 9 more minutes. So if you don't have any questions, I do. So who has a living design system that he or she uses? Do you have any experience with design system and components? How do you feel our Patternfly 4 as a universal solution? And how could we make this concept better together? Thank you.
Anyone wants to answer a question? Okay.
So one of the things I was curious to know, obviously we stand on the shoulders of giants. So in terms of the previous design patterns, in terms of UX, where did you get most of your, well, where was the greatest source of inspiration upon which you then built your Patternfly?
Okay.
Repeat the question because we couldn't hear it. Yeah, but we here couldn't hear.
Yeah, so as far as I understood it right, from where the inspiration came for Patternfly and how we got the data to build it?
No, that's too easy. No. So obviously, so my point by standing on the shoulders of giants is that you didn't just come out and bring this to the market, and certainly in terms of UX patterns, it's a fairly well-known topic. So I'm just curious to know where you got your inspiration from in terms of the body of knowledge that was already existing in order to evolve Patternfly.
Well, I'm a software engineer. I'm really sorry, and Teresa is unfortunately not here. Roxanne, right?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I couldn't fully hear the question. The inspiration for...
Yeah, so obviously this isn't new in terms of patterns. It's a framework that's enabling them. I'm just curious to know where you got your inspiration from, what existing bodies of work you can look at and extend, embrace, promote.
Sure. So for our patterns, where did the inspiration come from for a lot of them? So I think that's difficult. That can be difficult because design can be so opinionated, right? Like I interact with upstream communities. I interact with like direct customers, and I always get one guy who hates something and 5 guys who love something, and so we do look at what we would consider industry standard for UX best practices, and then we also look at to be frank, like we have a desire for a certain type of functionality. Who else is already doing it? Who do we think is doing it well? I mean, the reality is when you have a certain type of interaction and 15 of the 17 comparative examples you looked at are doing it, and they seem to be doing it well with great response. I mean, you do try to emulate that. Does that help at all?
Close. I mean, I'll cheat. So how I did it was I read stuff like the works of Alan Wilson.
Yeah.
Case as an example, so that was a good start.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they're sure you can pull from academic examples, you can pull, but ultimately, right, you kind of do your own user research in that you're looking at a pool of what's existing, and if it isn't existing, that's where it gets a lot trickier, right? That's where we have to actually start user testing our designs to see if they're actually, if they work. And that happens.
you're doing your. So you're talking about component-based design now. A site and building things that users want, they come up with almost unique looks for every page typically. How do you break that down into components that you can then build and reuse to make the sort of balance sensible? Because there's going to be a balance that you get to that says, don't want too many components because there's a lot to maintain, but I don't want too few because I want to be able to have enough design. So what's the approach you might take to finding that balance?
Okay, so let's go back to this pyramid. So the atomic components, I think, are kind of basic stuff. So you have a finite list of elements. That's the thing that we aren't really debating what's in there and what's not. And by reusing those components on the second level, those components are more specific to that product or project. But because they are using those atomic components, the look and feel will be, let's say, consistent.
How do you negotiate that with the end user, I suppose is what my question is coming to. Because the end user typically is going to want quite unique look and feel. Let's say I'm building a website and there's going to be 30 pages, and each page has a different goal associated, and the user has defined a lot of that. And you want to try and build things in a sense that will be usable from an engineering point of view. But you need to negotiate that with your user. That's more, I suppose, my question rather than the actual approach to implementing it.
Yeah, so I'm repeating the question. So how we negotiate this with the end user. So Red Hat products or the open source projects behind them aren't like end user, like they are end user products as well, but they are in-house developed for multiple customers at the same time. So how to say it right? It's not the same as you would build a website for someone specifically. So we are negotiating, so the designers are negotiating more with the engineers who are working on the project, if that answers your question.
I mean, so as we were saying, we take the basic components like a button, right? A button is going to look like a button. Where you put it on the page and how it interacts with everything is probably where I see more of the kind of delegating work or like the negotiation happening. If you adhere to like the basic design system that you have and then you build from that, it still will have that consistent look and feel despite each page having its own unique variability. And we have to do it a lot. I mean, some of the products we work on are just absolutely massive. 30 pages is nothing. It's more like 300. And then how do we handle a table that's like parsing like 20,000 entries at a time? So, but when we stick to those basic components, and it gets like even down to the font weight, how titles are handled, how these basic elements are handled on every single page gives us that consistency, at least from a look and feel. You're always going to have, there's no perfect world where everything is always falling into an exact spot, right? Every now and then you're going to have something that deviates. It just happens.
Thank you. So my question is a little bit more generic. What I want to ask is there any big challenge that you faced when you put together engineers and designers, user experience designers? So yeah, can you name one? That would be really interesting.
I want to design this, and the developer says, no, I can't do that. That's the biggest challenge. And that it's like an old married couple, or like getting divorced all of a sudden, and like, but we have to do this. I can't do that. Or even the worst answer is, and this is not anybody's fault, is I don't have that data. I don't have the data. That's really hard. And honestly, every situation is going to be different, but it's just about understanding that you're both trying to get to a good solution and knowing that it comes from a place of good intention. And how can we? There's compromise just has to happen. Compromise will lead to inconsistency, but it's just a dance. That to me is the biggest challenge that I run into. It's never about the will to do it. It's just, is it possible?
She's stealing the show from me. No, it's good.
When you talk about look and feel, before the projects before, they had buttons and tables and things, and I guess they were